They will have their whole lives to work a job. They have very few years to be a child. Assalamu alaikum everyone. मेरा नाम Syed Ahmed Shah है. I am a finance professional, a licensed NLP practitioner, a trainer, and general body member at Manzil Educational Organization. I welcome all of you on behalf of Manzil. In today's session, we will talk about child labor in Pakistan. What kind of child protection laws do we have in Pakistan? Is there any regulator who monitors the compliance of these regulations? We will also discuss if the child labor really is an exploitation, or is it still considered as a blessing for those who are living below poverty line? To discuss this very important matter tonight, we have with us Syed Muaz Shah. Mr. Shah has a bachelor's in law from University of London. He's the director at Center of Human Rights, Ziauddin University. He also teaches human rights and Islamic jurisprudence. He has practiced paralegal working in US criminal and immigration matters. He is an expert on children and women rights. He has worked extensively with international adoption agencies and local orphanages like Bilki Zethi Foundation, Siratul Jannah, Kashan, Hayatus Salam, etc. His list for children right is very long. That includes helping children find shelters, promoting best practices to ensure that children receive the appropriate care as per international laws. Mr. Shah occasionally speaks and writes on these matters of public interest. He's also a valuable member of Manzil, and he's a very wonderful person. Welcome, Mr. Shah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ahmed, for welcoming me tonight for this important topic that is a pressing matter in Pakistan.
Okay, Mr. Shah, we know that Article 11 of Constitution of Pakistan talks broadly about the fundamental rights, and it also prohibits forced labor. Is there any particular law in Pakistan against child labor that protects children?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting question that you started the topic with. What are the existing laws? What are the existing framework within Pakistan that come to mind? And you know, when you speak about fundamental rights, that's Article 11 that you cited. It is obviously the laying foundation of what the future laws that came in, because the Constitution is the root framework. But we've had laws that we have had developed since our independence, and then we have laws that have basically been inherited from the British and the British time period. So one of the key laws that were around during the British Raj was the Factories Act of 1934. And that is a key piece of legislation that kind of defined the basics of child labor and some rules and restrictions, particularly in factories. And, you know, you have to understand the socio-economic background and dynamics at the time. And you have to understand that British was coming out of the Industrial Revolution. And I don't know if you look at Victorian era England, and you see this, you know, black, sooty chimneys, you know, and children working in there. They're all blackened from all the coal and stuff. And that was kind of the theme that, you know, why are children working here? And so that movement started there. Its trickle-down effect throughout the world started happening in this late 19th century and early 20th century. And so Pakistan and India at the time were, of course, under the British. And this is that type of legislation that kind of covered those issues. So it mainly had to deal with, as you can see from the name, the Factories Act 1934. So it dealt with children working in factories. Now you would be surprised that, of course, you know, children working in factories, when we talk about the different factory that were producing different elements and all that. In fact, what's really interesting is that when we talk about child labor in Pakistan, factories doesn't really come to mind. I mean, you know, there was a study actually done in the US in 2014 when they said that, you know, the key areas that child laborers work in Pakistan is bricks, carpets, glass bangles, leathers, and surgical instruments. And not many of those are produced necessarily in a traditional factory setup. But, you know, whereas in the Factories Act in 1934, you're looking at a different dynamic at that time. And essentially what they did was they limited child labor to under the age of 14, it would not be allowed. And those who were allowed were between 14 to 18 with certain restrictions. So they wouldn't work on heavy machinery or when machineries were in motion or around dangerous work environments. So that was the main kind of key crux that you can say that resulted on that. Of course, after that, there was a lot of other child labor uh, aspects that came later on, the Employment of the Children Act 1991, and then of course there was some other small laws and legislations that came forward. But the Factories Act is known as the main kind of key place where you can say further legislation occurred. It goes to show you that where we haven't had any major progress since that time when it comes to children and child labor. I mean, only recently, and I'm kind of referencing this because there was a talk of making an amendment, because one of the key things when we talk about law is definition, right? What and who is defined as a child? And when you talk about that, a child is someone of what age? And legally speaking, how do we equate that with the age or with whatever certain parameters that define what a child is? And of course, traditionally, the idea is that it's a certain age marker. Of course, I don't subscribe to that thought process myself because I don't think there's an arbitrary number that you can just pick and choose. But then again, this is the law, and you want to make sure that things are done properly, and that's why often an age is chosen to distinguish, past this age or not past this age. And there was actually a Senate amendment just as of last year that they were discussing. It was a People's Party senator. She wanted to make the child age to be 18 across the board. So we had different legislations saying that a child is 16. Some places a child is defined as 14. Some places a child is defined as 18. So one of the key things, I guess, in law that's a big ambiguity for us is what does it mean to be a child? And that is one thing that often leads to a lot of the confusion. Now, in these particular acts, like for example, let's going back to the Factories Act 1934, they specifically define that. And it's interesting because they say children, the act itself says children between ages to 14 to 18. So they do still qualify them as children, but then they allow them to work in certain conditions. So that's basically kind of a really kind of rough sketch of what we have in Pakistan. So there are certain laws in place, particularly to protect children. How much of that is actually implemented is a whole different story, and I think that's another topic, and I think that's one of your follow-up questions that you're probably going to go
Exactly.
into.
Exactly. So, since we are stuck in definition of who is child, what does the International Labor Organization uh, regulations speaks about child labor, or what
Right.
references can we get from other best practices that are implemented in the world in order
Right.
to know who is child actually?
Now, that's interesting that you mentioned that when it comes to about the definition of a child. Now, in the most broadest context, what most have adopted is this arbitrary number of 18, and they have then, in America, they also have another number that they kind of talk about the age of 21, and that's when they get into full adulthood, and then they have these 3 years in between. And some countries it's different. Some countries they do 17. They've also had 16. There isn't any one set number. When it comes to the International Labor Organization, very interestingly, they have had multiple kind of rules and regulations governing. Now, they don't necessarily define it as a child. Basically, they only look into where a child can work. So, just to give you an example, in the International Labor Organization, they actually allow. I think there was, if I remember correctly, in one of their ordinance, one of their written thesis that they had the age of 13 to age of 15 for certain work, and in other places they mentioned 12 to 14. So where they have certain room for maneuver for certain work, and what I mean by that, and I look to the United States as another example here. In America, you can work on a family farm at the age of 12. So families who are working on subsistence farming and they provide for themselves, the children are taught those ethics, work ethic to work on the farm, and then they have these 3 years in between. And then they have these 3 years in between. So what they have certain room for maneuver for certain work, and what I mean by that, and I look to the United States as another example here. In America, you can work on a family farm at the age of 12. So families who are working on subsistence farming and they provide for themselves, the children are taught those at an early age. So they work at the age of 12. Now, some people would say, oh, wow, that's child labor, but it's a different case scenario. So we have these special circumstances, and I think that's extremely important. It's very easy to just draw up an arbitrary number, 18, stamp it into law, make it that is, that no child can work under the age of 18. But looking at the socioeconomic dynamics of Pakistan, what's on the ground, we have a population that's almost about 60, 70% under the age of 30. So there's more children probably than there are adults. And so when it comes to, an average household having to feed six, seven, eight mouths, one person's, $6 a day wage may not be enough. And because Pakistan's per capita GDP is hardly like 2,000. So you can imagine the cost, and it's just cost prohibited for them to even entertain the idea of not employing certain children. And this isn't because the parents hate their children, the parents are trying to exploit their children. It's just, a situation that the family has to go through. And the child also understands that because these children mature a lot faster and they get into the job market. And it's interesting because I'm not trying to be judgmental, and I understand at the same time that child should be getting basic education and have a good foundation for their future. But at the same time, it's easy to judge sitting here in our seats saying that, oh, your child should not work without understanding the socioeconomic dynamics of where they're coming from. Or is the government willing to provide, food and shelter to these children along with the education, right? So it's easy to say free education, but how are you going to feed those children? Are you giving these meals in school? Right? Is there some sort of incentive? And I think about that when I look to a lot of these third world, second world countries who are just coming up into the first world, and Pakistan being a part of them. So we look at some counter examples elsewhere. So one example I like to share a lot is Brazil. So Brazil recently, during the last government regime, started a program called Bolsa Familia. It was a very interesting government project that they started, and it helped almost like 30, 40 million people and families across Brazil. And what they did was the government would actually pay families to not employ their children, but rather send them to school. And there would be certain checks. For example, did the child come to school? Check. Did he attend all the classes? Check. And they also had a health aspect to it too. So did you go for the monthly checkup? Check. Or get his vaccinations checked. Once you had all these checks in your thing and you submitted to the government sent you a check of money that then you could use to help your family. Now that was very revolutionary. It helped a lot of people. It pulled a lot of children out of child labor. It was a very successful program. And it goes to show you that when it comes to the execution of the strategy in trying to solve the problem, and we do have this prevalent problem in Pakistan when it comes to child labor, how do we go about doing it? So ideas like this are how we're really going to get this issue out, out into the open. So when it comes to, again, definition of children, it's really difficult to kind of put an exact number. And even if you do, you still would then allow certain situations. So let's say even if it's 18, you would say a child can still work in certain circumstances, and even the International Labor Organization allows that. Now, with that all said and done, then we have to look at the practical implications on ground realities, what's going on in Pakistan. And like I said, we have those six main areas, glass bangles, coal, even leather, surgical equipment. These are areas where children are working. Famously, if you know that in Sialkot and other areas, when they make these famous soccer balls that are internationally renowned, FIFA uses them. There was an outcry in the 90s when they found out that children are actually manufacturing these footballs. And it's interesting because when you ask the locals there, and again, this is extremely important. You have to look at the whole issue in general and then go in depth, and you'll find some unique nuances, and you're going to have to make some exceptions. So apparently there's one stitch in that football that only a child could possibly do because of the nimbleness of their fingers. And that changes all these, and we all enjoy sport. We all enjoy FIFA and football, and imagine, you know um, if we didn't have that child labor, we couldn't have that football. But is that legitimate? Is that not? And that's a question we need to ask ourselves. where do we draw these lines? So what ends up happening is sometimes then when we do allow certain segments to do certain amounts of labor, limited qualities, protected nature, and let the child do work, it comes into abuse, and other people then start using children and forced labor, not paying them, uh, you know, uh, really below minimum wage payment, slave labor almost, essentially, that's what it turns out to. So that balancing act is something very difficult. And we did to have a qualitative conversation, you can't just like draw the line in the sand, like I keep going back to that statement, but looking at everything in a very qualitative light and then being able to determine what may be the best route. So Pakistan does have serious issues of violation of heavy labor on children, especially the infamous brick kilns in Sindh and Punjab in particular, where they have children working in abhorrent conditions, and maybe the focus should be more on the conditions of labor as and how they are, as less on the age of, oh, this person should work or not, and the criminal liability should be on the conditions of work and how they're unsafe. And if the focus was there, maybe we might have better results than just trying to talk about child labor and all that. Create the condition, create the spaces that can be safer for them, and all that. Not to say that children at the age of 5 should be working, but when we talk about children from the age of 14 and like even the Factories Act, some people would disagree, but they would say that only 18 and above. But I think there is some space, and if we talk about one of the most recognized democracies and of the free world in America, a person at the age of 12, a child at the age of 12, can work on a family farm and various other activities and laborers. And they recognize hardship as a factor sometimes when it comes to that. Just to give you an example, in America, they have a concept called hardship license. And that's to basically allow younger people between the age of 14 and 16 licenses to drive cars because they need to for hardship reasons and to travel. So we have to be considerate of the situation, and this conversation, like I said, can go on. But the message I would really basically like to have here is that it just can't be some arbitrary, cookie cutting solution. We have to think outside the box. The Bolsa Familia solution, like I said, was extremely successful in Brazil. Maybe a similar model here would be quite successful, where families aren't stressed to actually send a child to labor. So let's stop creating the scenario to push children into child labor instead of just drawing a line and saying, hey, your child can't work. Why are they working? So the qualitative solution is to solve the problem at its root and not at the back end. And that would be my kind of 2 cents on that.
Well said that it's not that simple to draw a line and say that below 18 should not work. The nature of the work, the intensity, the hardship of the work, they also matter, and especially the social economic dimensions of our country. Now let's move to the next question. What are the loopholes in our existing child labor law of Pakistan which make it impractical and difficult to implement? And what needs to be improved? How how is our law different from the international laws, or is it
Yeah,
aligned?
yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't say that our laws are necessarily in violation of any international laws per se. I think the problem where it comes to our laws are not implemented in a way. So when you have the Factories Act, so let's just take that. Even though this law was before the creation of Pakistan, where it's saying that children should not work under the age of 14 in certain spaces, right? And even those who are working between 14 and 18 have to work with certain conditions. So, and they still are working in those conditions, right? So it's a violation of the law. So where is the implementation? Where is the state structure to bring these people to account? Where is the penalization? Where is the criminal, liabilities? And that's where I feel that it's more about the implementation of the law rather than the law itself that's in question. And that's why I don't think law creation is really exactly the right solution here, but maybe a more socio-economic solution to the problem itself. Again, we have to ask ourselves, why are children working, right? So, a part of the problem is, well, supposedly the schools that they're supposed to go to are non-existent, right? So they really aren't, that's not even there. So let's say even if they were there, then maybe some of them would actually go to school instead of be working because they have to just do something productive. um, that's a separate issue in itself, and I think we can talk about that as education issue in Pakistan. But when we talk about families and their socioeconomic conditions, has the state improved the socioeconomic condition of families to prevent children from being used as labor? And could that be a more effective solution? I gave you that example about Bolsa Familia in Brazil, and there's many other projects like this across the world, and many other jurisdictions that have tried different issues, different solutions to that. Then, like I said, Join just go into the basic implementation of the existing legal framework. If we have just that, it can send a very strong message on child labor and its abuses. The problem is that children from the age of 5 are being employed in such horrendous conditions that are already not only a violation of international law, they're a violation of national and provincial law throughout Pakistan. But what are the consequences? It's interesting that, again, this whole thing comes into often at times on a lot of issues that are prevailing in Pakistan, a lot of the key social issues. Especially recently, there was, that issue on the rape matter. It's about the implementation of the existing legal framework, and I think that's something that we just are not doing on a state level, and for whatever reason, because maybe the people who are employing these children, they have more social power, and they're able to avoid, and they're able to buy the police. They're able to corrupt the evidence. So even if you try to go take them for prosecution purposes, the case is so mishandled that they can't even get prosecuted. So these are kind of things that are really, and then what ends up happening is the people themselves who are suffering, right? Particularly those children who are forced into labor, they can't rely on the state institutions. Just to give you an example, and I was just kind of going into Urdu, जो रिलायंस है, आम आवाम ने अपना जो है वो faith ही lose कर लिया. They've lost their trust in the state structure, and I think that is the key thing that is really detrimental to any progress in the implementation of laws. And I would say that if we just started doing that, we would not face that. So when I compare them to international laws and local laws and national laws, there isn't much of a difference. I wouldn't say there's any major key violations. Like I said, even International Labor Organization recognizes the employment of children from the age of 12 to 14 in certain sectors and 13 to 15 other sectors. And even, like I said, great democracies like America, they've allowed the children to the age of 12 working on farms. But where it comes to, the existing framework, when we start going beyond that limit, beyond those special case circumstances, what is the consequence for those who do that? I mean, recently, I don't know if you remember, and we get these surprise cases because it becomes sensational news. I think earlier this year, somewhere, there was a couple in I think Punjab. I don't know if it was Lahore or Islamabad. They employed some child that was the age of 8, and I believe the child had made some mistake or something, and they ended up killing the child, and it became caught up in the news. And then, oh my God, they're actually employing children. And I kid you not, Ahmed, we're talking about very elite, educated people employing children in their homes, right? So forget, we're talking about age 8, 9, 10, and these zamindar one and feudalist people. They have, and they talk about, and these are the same people. You know what? It would be really funny and really interesting, and I know this sounds quite outlandish, if we just closed the doors of Parliament and we went to each one of their houses. I guarantee you, in half the senators and half the provincial ministers, you'll find a child working in their homes. I guarantee you. So when you have the lawmakers themselves violating the very laws that they're passing and trying to, this is the huge kind of issue that we're facing. How can you expect other people to even practice or follow or implement the law when the lawmakers themselves are in questions? And I mean, I just made an open statement like that, but I'm pretty sure you would find these violations because it's very common in very well-off, rich homes where you find, a child working.
Yeah, we have various
And
examples. Last year, we saw a case of a young girl working in a judge house, and where she was
that's right.
tortured. And we often see these young workers, young servants, sitting in the trunk in the luggage area of their cars, and it's so not. It's inhuman.
Absolutely. And so, Ahmed, when we talk about how we're going to bring the change here, the very people who are part of the structure of the state institutions, judges, lawmakers, they themselves are not going to be implementing the law, then their law is not going to be respected. It's not going to be implemented. The police is not going to take it as serious. And people use social pressures to get out of this. And what happens is poor children are being abused, and there's no one to kind of fight for them. So you have a few human rights organizations, some NGOs trying to do some work, but otherwise, that's it. There really isn't anything else. So that's always been, this is a huge, it's a huge white elephant in the room. So when are we going to get ready to address that? And I feel that if we don't start there, then we're not going to get any progress, not in this country, because people will always use, oh, so and so judge did it, oh, so and so lawmaker, has it, and there's no respect for it. There's no respect for the law.
सो अब हम ये भी जानना चाहेंगे इन सारी चीजों को समझने के बाद कि रेगुलेटर कौन है, इन चीजों को ठीक कौन करेगा, या मैं या एक कॉमन बंदा जब इस तरह की कोई चीज ऑब्जर्व करे, so where should he report it? Is there any platform? Or I've been in the industry since a decade, but I don't know who is going to take care of my office if I employ a child. I
Right.
don't know if welfare workers welfare organization is responsible for it, or the excise who collect the professional tax based on the head
Well,
count in the organization. Who
yeah.
who take the eye on this whole thing, that how many children are employed in factories and companies, etc., etc.
Well, there are provincial bodies. So, like in Sindh, you have the Child Protection Agency. In Punjab, you have the Child Protection Bureau, and in the other provinces, they also have certain similar bodies in their social welfare departments. So they actually have members of their team, social workers, that are responsible, and you can always file a complaint with them, and they follow up with that. But again, implementation, right? So if it's like a big party, कोई बड़ी party है, कोई connected party है, तो वो बहुत मुश्किल होता है उसको prosecution stage पे आप लेके जाएं. Even कुछ आप अगर even civil damages में भी उनको कोई चालान भरने के लिए आप दे दें भी कि आपने violate किया ये वो, even that is very difficult to even do. And in fact, there's a lot of good talk, and when NGOs come around and there's aid money being floated around from USAID and all that, they'll all say the right things. But I'll be very honest with you, the Child Protection Bureau, even in Sin, I'll give an example. They formulated a committee that was supposed to meet I think every quarter, and ever since they formed, they never met. So when they launched it, it is hurrah! Oh, we have this child protection consortium of advocates and journalists and lawmakers and the CM himself. But when it came to actual, just even the meeting itself of that group, then that just never happened. So great fancy announcements with news story ban gayi and all that, because koi hadsa hua hoga and uska reaction mein ye kiya, but no follow through, right? And what have they done? Right? So it's like we're always a reactionary society. Something happens, wo judge ka wo waqiya hua, oh no, we need to do something. All of a sudden, the attention is going to be there. We react to it. We create this body. We create a commission, and we need a lot of good talk, but not much action. And we go back to square one again. So you see this repeated cycle behavior in many issues, not just child labor. Many other issues that come up. There's a reaction. There's some announcements, and then there's no follow through and implementation. And that should show you, because what you're trying to create a commission, or you're trying to do this, or you're trying to call for action. It's very funny, if you flip the old books of the law, you'll find, hey, the law is already there. There's no need to make new law. There's no need to, you just have to prosecute. You just have to implement the law. and then people will know this is what it is. And that is, I think, the same case scenario here. Going back to what I said, that yes, you have these child protection bureaus and agencies in Sindh and Child Protection Bureau in Punjab, and the other provinces as well have bodies within the social welfare department, and you can reach out to them for any report if you have a complaint on anything. Of course, you can go to the police station as well and try to file a complaint as well there. A complaint can be registered with them as well. But again, how far would that complaint go, right? Policeman mishandling investigation, then prosecution becomes troublesome, and then they get out of it. So one thing I would say when it comes to actually practically doing anything, Ahmed, and I know it's really sad for me to suggest this, but the reality is, go grab a smartphone, go live on Facebook, and go show it to the world. And that probably gets more action and more attention than you trying to file a complaint and going through the system. And that, unfortunately, is how bad the system is. Not to say that I'm discouraging people from going file complaints. No, do your due diligence as a lawyer. I would always recommend put in the complaint to the police station, put in the complaint to the child bureau, child welfare bureau, child welfare agency, child protection agency, a child protection bureau in Punjab, and the social welfare departments. But at the same time, you got to use social media.
Hmm.
You have to use social media as a platform to highlight this. And you and me both know, we just have to open our news feeds, and next thing you know, someone's got a video of some, religious seminary school, and a Molana Saab is beating a kid.
Hmm.
Now, if that hadn't been recorded, that hadn't been spread, that hadn't been identified, we wouldn't have any action. It puts pressure on the police. It puts pressure on state institutions that they have to do something, because it just looks bad for PR. Uh, and that sort of pressure, I think, unfortunately, like I said, the system is designed that way, but it's also fortunate that, hey, there is something that I can do. So I would highly encourage people to not only file the complaint, whatever, but get videographic evidence that you can share on a social media platform to bring attention to it. Because unfortunately, it's like these government offices are there, they'll take a complaint, put it on their shelf, and they might not even investigate it. But if it's in the social media, there's a lot of heat behind it. They're going to get pressure from the top. Hey, solve this issue as soon as possible and get it done. So I would definitely encourage that, not only filing these complaints with these different idaras and social welfare department, child protection agency, or child protection bureau, depending on what province you're on, and the social welfare department, but also the police, and on top of that, put out the message. And other organizations like NGOs can be extremely helpful. So HRCP, the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan, been working for a very long time. They also have links for that, and they can hook you up with maybe lawyers or some contacts that can help you process that case much more efficiently and apply enough pressure to make something happen.
Okay, with all these efforts of individuals spreading such incidents on social media, if tomorrow a miracles happen और ये सारे लॉ इम्प्लीमेंट हो जाते हैं और 18 साल से कम सारे बच्चों को घर में बिठा दिया जाता है, इट इज अगेन
Then,
अच्छी
then
बात नहीं
I'd
है.
be out of work. Then I'd be out of work as the
Really,
Center
are you
for.
below 18?
I'll be Center for Human Rights. Wouldn't need to do any of
Okay.
this. We wouldn't need to. The NGOs it would be like a holiday for us. Because we're the ones coming after these issues. We're the ones who are highlighting these issues because they lack implementation in society. Now, if they were just implemented, honestly, you wouldn't need this many NGOs running around, ED Foundation, none of that. If the government and the state institutions do their part, non-government bodies do not necessarily need to exist. We only exist simply because the government is not doing their part, and the people need some sort of solution. I mean, just Edi Saab's story is most famous about this. I mean, he just, how did he start off? He just seen that people were dying, and there was no state institution taking care of the body, and taking it to a facility. So he came up with the ED ambulance idea, and the next thing you know, the ED Foundation, the seeds of it was born. And now you look what they're doing. They're doing all this work is because the state has abandoned or the state does not feel that it's responsible for these things or providing these things to the people or implementing the existing laws or legal frameworks. They're busy doing other things, and that's the sad part of the situation in Pakistan. Now, of course, one government to the next, there's been some improvement, disimprovement. I'm not, just saying, but the state institutions have to do more. And it's not like they have to invent something new. It's already on the books. You just have to implement whatever is existing on the books and take strict action against your own. So if you have a judge, you have like a policymaker or a lawmaker, anybody who's working in government, violating the laws of the Islami Jamhuriyat of Pakistan, they need to be removed from their post. They need to be sanctioned. That goes without saying. And when you do not pass any sort of punishment, you're basically tacitly approving such actions, and that becomes what the dilemma is, and a lack of respect for the law, and a collapse of the rule of law, which leads to this anarchist state. And I'm not saying that Pakistan is there or anything, but it's what leads to it. When you don't implement the existing legal framework.
Yeah, but on the other hand, ये सब कुछ implement हो गया, लेकिन due to the socio-economics grounds, on the socio-economic grounds, वो सारे बच्चे who are orphans, जिनका बाप नशा करता है, जिसका बाप जेल में बंद है, और उसको मजबूरी के तहत काम करना पड़ता है, और वो वॉलंटरी कर रहा है, उससे नहीं लगता कि कोई जुल्म है. He's happy earning
Yeah.
bread for his family.
Absolutely, and that's the relative analysis and qualitative analysis. I think it's extremely necessary before passing any new law, because ये बहुत आसान है नया law pass करना. It's not about passing new law. It's about understanding the problem, the fundamentals of the problem. If he is an orphan, why do we not have any state institutions or straight structure to take care of that person? Right? Why is there not a place where he can go, where he can get education, where he can find a home, where he can eat and not have to worry about these things? Why have we created a scenario where he is forced to do that? And the same thing goes with prostitution. And a lot of people say, oh, prostitution is illegal, prostitution. Well, listen, what leads women to prostitution? Right? Unko majboor kya karta hai that makes them into prostitutes? No one starts asking about those questions. I swear to God, you go and talk to a person who's in prostitution, and 9 out of 10 they're going to tell you of some situation or some money situation, not because unki koi lalach hai, but unke 4 bacche hain, unko मुंह में किसी चीज डालनी है, खिलाना है,
किराया
तो
देना
रात
है,
में
उसको अपनी माँ की दवाई
किराया
लानी
देना है.
है.
And there you go. So prostitution, I can pass all the laws that prostitution is illegal, prostitution को ban करना चाहिए, and I'm not promoting prostitution at all, but I'm asking society कि हम ये सवाल क्यों नहीं पूछते कि उस औरत को इतना मजबूर क्या चीज़, और हमें खुद अपने आप से पूछना चाहिए as Pakistani citizens, what have we created, what sort of monstrous society have we created that she cannot find relief and she has to resort to this, right? And that is where I feel that the questions are not being asked. So what makes a child go into child labor? If you're talking about lavarisa, orphan, you got people who are, only children are able to work, mazur unke maa baap hai, unko khayal karna hai. In all these other case scenarios, baap nashe karta hai, to wo khud bachcha ghar chala raha hai dusron ke liye. That's why, again, a blanket solution or blanket law passing, this is not the way. I think we got enough laws in the book. Usko hi implement karne to bahut badi baat hai. And at the same time, when we talk about a qualitative socio-economic response that's most appropriate for Pakistan, we need to think a little bit outside the box. Government policy, I think, should be much focused on this issue, particularly if we want to tackle education as well. Why bachon ki education nahi ho rahi schoolon ke andar? And a key reason for that is this as well. So child labor intertwined with child education. And it's like, if you address this key issue right here, this is maybe poverty, right? So poverty is a key thing. You could knock out 2 birds with 1 stone. And that's what it should be. The focus should be, how do we eliminate poverty? How do we give them a space, guaranteed living, basic living standard, ताकि उनको मजबूर नहीं होना पड़ता कि इस रास्ते पे आए, child labor पे चले जाए, prostitution पे, skipping school or not going to school. We could address a bunch of plethora of issues by addressing the poverty. I think tackling poverty is very key. I know Imran Khan and his government have announced a few interesting schemes. I don't know how that like the panaga that he has for people who are homeless, a place where they can respectively eat and sleep and get that. That's a good step in that direction. The idea that he's going to make these homes, like 50 million homes was, the claim. Sorry, 5 million homes, and in that, basically, how I hope that he's focusing on lower income housing, because people who can't afford, expensive housing and all that, is that a solution for them? And that hasn't really gone towards much execution stage, other than collecting a bunch of names and some basic funds. And I'm looking forward to how he would solve the housing crisis, because that's a housing crisis. Housing, food, some basic necessities that the people have. Trust me, you wouldn't have child labor. That's just the reality. I mean, there wouldn't be a market for children that people could exploit. So eliminate that, and I think that's going to be more effective in tackling child labor than anything else.
Okay, as we move towards the end of today's session, I would like you to comment your final remarks. Maybe something I have missed, you being an expert, if you want to add something.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert at all, but I would say this much. I am activist in this regards, and one thing I highly encourage is every single person who's listening to this, and mark my words, every single person who's listening to this, you as a single person can make a difference. And I speak from that from experience, because if you can make a difference in a difference just in one child's life, you can make a difference, for the rest of his life, and that could be life changing. And it's a big change. So we all can step up and do our portion. We all can speak about it. We all can make other people aware about it. We all can actually get involved further and highlight these issues and bring it up to the forefront, and force the state institutions to implement it, right? And I think that's one thing that we have to kind of keep pushing and keep that agenda on the books, and call out people who are in violation of child labor, and the basic laws, the legal framework. There's no need to create new laws. I am highly against that. So if everything, oh, let's create a new law, let's no, that's not the solution. The solution is actually going to the root and tackling the problem at its root. What And ask ourselves, what forced this child into labor? So next time, if you really want to do something about child labor and really understand it, when that child is working, pull up on that child. Maybe provide them a meal, sit with them, talk to them, understand their problem, so that you know better how to help tackle it. Because if you don't know why they're being forced into child labor, you can never end up solving the problem by just making some arbitrary rules or guidelines. And that's why I would highly encourage everyone who's listening to this, is if you really want to know what the issue is, and if you didn't believe me or heard from it, go to a child who's actually working and ask them, what is the reason why they're working. And to be honest, they will tell you the truth. And then it'll surprise you. Drugs is the problem. Then it'll surprise you that poverty is the problem. Then it'll surprise, and all these other plethora issues. Like, wow, that's what pushed this child into labor. And only then, Ahmed, can we actually have meaningful change. And instead of having a curative approach, we'll have a preventive approach. So we'll prevent children from coming into the labor market, right?
Sure.
And that, I think, was the message that I would like to leave your listeners and viewers for today.
Thank you so much, Masha, for taking out time for
No, it's my
this
pleasure.
session.
I've always worked loving with Manzil, and Manzil's doing amazing work. And I know the entire team there, Shazia and everybody, including yourself, for many years in this, and just to give you an example, that was a small project. And, and Manzil already had the story. But again, they talk about one person, and Shazia started this with what, 1,800 rupees, right? She rented out one small room, and now, mashallah, look at Manzil organization, 16, 17 years. Those very children she taught then are now teaching the other children back in that same school. So it's a sustainable model, and it was one person who made that difference, and one college going person. So it's not even someone who has some degree or something. She was in high school, right, or just college, just starting out, and that's what it is. And that is the difference that people can make in their communities and make that difference. Again, relying on state institutions, yes, we should push them. Yes, file the complaints. लेकिन उनके ऊपर मत rely कीजिए. आप खुद आपको कुछ action करना पड़ेगा if you want to make a difference in your community. And small things, trust me, little rocks build mountains, and you can bring big change from their small little efforts. So, I really appreciate Manzil being an example of how just a small thing could become such a big, platform now for us to talk about these things.
Yes, I am a product of Manzil. I remember I used to work when I was in class 5 in a bookshop, and I have a whole story how Manzil took me from where I was and bring me where I am today. It's a different topic. We'll talk about it some another day, and we hope to engage you again because this is a very long topic. We have covered few parts of it, and now we have just realized, and we have uh, a picture has just emerged that the child labor is not alone. It is interconnected with poverty, with drugs, with many other socioeconomics issues. So I hope to engage you again in a series of talks again regarding this child labor issue.
I really look forward to it. Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz.
Hafiz.